6 armed men walked into the Silver Bell and laughed. They laughed at the old man holding a broom. That was their mistake. Jake Brennan stepped forward. His boots cost more than most men's horses. His voice cut through the room like a blade. "That's your protection, widow? A broken-down floor sweeper?" The old man set his glass down, slowly, with measured calm. His pale blue eyes lifted and found Brennan's. "I'm giving you one chance, Mr. Brennan. Walk out that door. Leave Mrs. Rhee alone." "Take it." Brennan laughed. His 6 men laughed with him. Then the old man's hand moved. The Colt cleared leather. The hammer came back with a sound like a bone snapping. The barrel leveled at Brennan's chest. One fluid motion. No pause. No hesitation. And the hand holding that gun did not shake. Not even slightly. It had never been more still in 20 years. The man rode in at the tail end of afternoon. Nobody paid much attention. Drifters came through Duskwater often enough. He tied his horse at the Silver Bell rail. He took his saddlebag off slowly. He walked inside. Catherine Rhee was behind the bar, 39 years old, running the Silver Bell alone for 7 months. 7 months since she found Thomas on the kitchen floor, one hand still reaching for the coffee pot. He had been 45. His heart gave out without warning. She buried him on a Tuesday. By Thursday, she had opened the saloon again. Because that was what Thomas would have wanted. Because bills don't pause for grief. Because she was not the kind of woman who sat down in the middle of a fight. The old man stood just inside the door. Hat in his hand, he walked to the bar, set his hat on the stool beside him. "I'm looking for work," he said. His voice was rough from long disuse. She looked at him the way she looked at everyone. Quickly, completely, she saw the tremor in his hands. She saw the bent back. She saw a man asking for less than he needed. "What kind of work?" she asked. "Whatever needs doing. I'm thorough. I can't pay much. I'm not asking for much." She poured him a coffee without being asked, set it in front of him, told him he could start in the morning. His name, he said, was Marcus. Just Marcus. She'd address him for more. He was there the next morning before she came downstairs. The floors were done. The tables were clean. The chairs faced the right direction. A pot sat warm on the iron stove. The smell of it filled the room. For just a moment, Silver Bell felt like before, like when Thomas was alive. Catherine stood at the bottom of the stairs. She looked at the clean room. She looked at the old man working on the windows, moving without hurry, with old, practiced precision, as if every movement had been decided before it began. She poured herself a cup without a word. He did not turn around. Marcus worked every day. He was thorough, as promised. He hauled and cleaned and fixed without complaint. He noticed things that needed doing without being told. A loose board near the entrance, a chair with a cracked leg, a window that needed the latch lifted just right. He fixed them coquettely, without making a show of it. The town saw what it expected to see. Old Charlie Hutton, 15 years on the piano, told his wife Catherine had taken in a charity case. The Friday card players agreed. "Poor woman," they said, feeding some broken-down drifter out of pity. None of them looked closely enough. None of them noticed how Marcus positioned himself each morning, always with a clear line of sight to the front door. None of them noticed the tremor in his hands disappeared whenever someone raised their voice inside. And not one of them paid any attention to the 2 Colt revolvers at his hips. Worn leather, smooth bone grips, unremarkable to anyone who wasn't looking. People see what they expect to see. They expected an old man, so that is what they saw. There were things Catherine observed and did not ask about. She observed he was always awake before her. No matter the hour she came down, the stove was already warm. She observed he slept very little, not because she heard him moving. He was quiet as snowfall, but the shadows under his eyes never cleared, and once, at 2 in the morning, she saw the thin line of lamplight under his door. She observed that certain sounds made him go still. A gunshot in the distance, a bottle breaking, occasionally just a door slamming too hard. Not startled, still, the way an animal goes still when it hears something it recognizes as dangerous. His eyes would fix on a point in the middle distance. His hands would stop whatever they were doing. Then, after a few seconds, he would breathe again and continue as if nothing had happened. She held all of this and asked nothing. One morning she found him at the small table by the stove, not working, just sitting, both hands wrapped around a cup that had gone cold, eyes fixed on the low flame in the grate. He did not hear her come down. She'd find she stood and watched the firelight move across his face. The deep lines, the weight on his shoulders. She recognized that posture. She had worn it herself, sat down across from him. He looked up, the quick alertness. Then it settled. "Didn't hear you," he said. "I know." They sat in silence. After a while she said, "You don't have to tell me anything." He looked at her. "About where you came from or why you're here. You don't owe me a story, Marcus. You've been straight with me about your work." "That's enough. Most people would want to know," he said. "Most people would. I'm asking, instead, if you want your cup warmed up." Something happened at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, more like the memory of one. "Yes," he said. "Thank you." She warmed his cup. They sat together as the darkness turned slowly toward gray. 3 months after Marcus arrived, Jake Brennan walked into Silver Bell, well-dressed, broad across the shoulders, the confidence of a man long used to being the most powerful person in any room he entered. He sat at the bar, ordered a whiskey he barely touched, and told Catherine he wanted to buy the Silver Bell. The price he named was fair. He said so more than once, as though fairness were a virtue he wanted recognized. Catherine listened to all of it. Then she said no. Brennan smiled, the smile of a man who had heard that word before, and always found a way past it. "Your husband built this place. I respect that. But sentiment doesn't pay the bills, Mrs. Ree." "I manage fine," she said. "I don't doubt your capability. I'm simply offering a clean way forward. My answer is no. The Silver Bell is not for sale." He nodded slowly, finished his barely touched whiskey, stood. "Think it over," he said pleasantly. "My offer stays open." He turned toward the door. He passed Marcus on the way out. And something happened that lasted less than 2 seconds. Brennan glanced at Marcus, not through him, not past him, at him. The look of a man confirming something he had already been thinking about. Then he looked away, walked out into the afternoon. Catherine had not caught the exchange, but that night, for the first time since arriving in Duskwater, Marcus did not sleep at all. He sat at the small table in his room, lamp turned low, both hands flat on the wood, completely still. He stayed that way until the gray light showed at the window before dawn. 2 weeks later, a window was broken in the night. A rock among the shards, no note, no need for one. Catherine stood in the early light and looked at the broken frame. Thomas had made that frame himself the week they opened Silver Bell. 3 days to get it exactly right. She had teased him about it. "Thomas, it's a window frame, not a cathedral." He had smiled and kept working. She swept up the glass, lighted the opening, opened the Silver Bell that morning, same as any other. When she set the broom back in the corner and looked up, she found Marcus watching her from across the room. "He'll be back," Marcus said. "Not a question." "I know," she said. "You could sell. I could." She looked at the bar Thomas had built, at the walls they had painted together one summer afternoon, laughing at each other's mistakes. "But I won't." Marcus was quiet. "No," he said. "I didn't think you would." And he went back to work. 3 weeks after the broken window, Brennan came back. This time he did not come alone. He came on a Thursday afternoon, late enough that the light was coming in, low and sharp. Charlie Hutton was at the piano. An old waltz. Hands moving from long memory, Brennan came in first, then 5 men fanning across the entrance, then a 6th, stopping just inside the door, Leon. Careful. Kansas dust on his shoulders, a man who knew how to stand in dangerous rooms. Charlie played 2 more bars, then he stopped. He closed the piano lid with both hands, took his coat, walked out the side door without looking at anyone. The card players folded their hands. The drinkers left money on the tables. Within 2 minutes, the silver bell was empty, except for Catherine behind the bar, Marcus near the back shelf, and Brennan, with 5 armed men between him and the door. Brennan looked around the empty room. He looked at Catherine. He smiled. "I've come for your decision, Mrs. Ree." Catherine's hands were flat on the bar, steady. She glanced once toward Marcus. He was already watching Brennan, and Brennan, she saw it clearly now, had been watching Marcus since the moment he came through the door, not the way a man watches a janitor, the way a man looks at something he has spent a very long time trying to find. That was the moment Catherine understood. She did not know the whole truth about the man she had hired. She straightened her spine. Brennan took one more step forward, and in the corner of the room, Marcus set down the glass he had been polishing without hurry, and turned around. That was how it started. 6 men in a room, a widow, who would not be broken, and an old man that everyone had dismissed. For 18 months, the least worth noticing person in Duskwater. They were all about to find out how wrong they were. Brennan crossed the room to the bar. His boots were loud on the floor. His posture carried the confidence of a man who had arranged things to his satisfactions. He did not look at Marcus immediately. "The effort of that non-looking was visible, Mrs. Ree," he said. 3 days as promised. "I heard you the first time," Catherine said. "My answer is the same." The pleasant expression on Brennan's face was gone, now set aside. "Like a tool no longer needed, I've given you more time and more consideration than I give most people." He set both hands flat on the bar. "I need you to understand that my patience, Mr. Brennan." The voice came from the back of the room, low, level, without urgency or performance. Brennan's jaw tightened. He turned. Marcus had moved to the center of the room, equidistant from the bar and the door, hands loose at his sides. Quell settled. The tremor that had lived in his hands for 18 months was gone. His stillness was not the stillness of a man at rest. It was the stillness of complete readiness. She said. "No," Marcus said. 3 times. "The answer isn't changing." One of Brennan's men laughed. Then another, forced laughter, the kind men make when their boss expects it. In the back of the room, Cole did not laugh. Cole had taken 2 quiet steps to his left, not toward Marcus, not toward the door, to a position with better sight lines. His hand had not gone to his weapon. It rested on his belt buckle, a gesture that meant nothing. That gave his hand somewhere neutral to be, while his eyes did their work. His eyes were on the grips of the Colt at Marcus's right hip, the bone handles, the age of them, the wear, the 2 letters carved into the grip. McColl's mouth opened slightly. "Closed, old man," Brennan said. Something in his voice was not quite contempt, something more complicated, more tired. The voice of a man who had rehearsed this moment many times and was finding the reality had a different texture than the rehearsal. "You don't want to put yourself in the middle of this. I'm already in it," Marcus said. 18 months in. His right shoulder dropped a fraction. His right hand fell to his side, hung there, completely relaxed. Cole saw it. Cole's face went white. "Boss," he said. His voice came out careful, controlled. The voice of a man delivering information that needs to land correctly. "Look at the grips on that Colt." Brennan's jaw set. "Cole." "I don't need." "The initials?" Cole took 1 step forward, then stopped. "M.W." "Boss." "Look at them." Something in Cole's voice made Brennan look. He looked at the worn bone handles, at the two carved letters. He went still. "Fifth Cavalry," Cole said quietly, each word placed with care. "Apache campaigns. Scout, work out of Fort Apache." They called him Silent Marcus because he never warned anyone, never threatened, just did what needed doing. Cole swallowed once. He brought in over 100 men. Nobody knows how many he killed. He disappeared. Everybody figured he was dead. The room held its breath. Brennan's expression shifted, not to simple fear, to something older, more complicated. The face of a man arriving at the end of a very long road and finding the destination is not what he pictured. "Marcus Webb," Brennan said. "That's right," Marcus said. Brennan was quiet. Then, 23 years. "I know," Marcus said. That stopped Brennan. "His chin came up, you know?" "I suspected. 3 months ago. When you first walked in here." Marcus held his gaze without effort. A man looks at a stranger differently than a man looks at someone he's been trying to find. For a moment, something crossed Brennan's face that was not rage and not fear. Something hollower than either. The expression of a man who has spent more than 2 decades carrying something heavy, has set it down, and discovered the setting down does not feel the way he thought it would. Then he straightened. His voice found its hard edge again. "You can't take 6 men, whatever you were. You're old now. You'd get 1, maybe 2 before." "I'll kill you first," Marcus said, not raising his voice, just stating, "That I promise. You'll be dead before you hit the floor. Your men may get me after, probably will, but you won't see it. You'll just see black." He let that settle. "So I'm asking you, what is this worth? What is your anger worth? Is it worth dying today?" The young one, Danny, started to move. His hand drifted toward his hip. Marcus's left hand moved. The second Colt appeared. Both hammers back. Both barrels covering the room with the calm, unhurried authority of a man who had done this before and come out the other side. Danny's hand stopped. Marcus looked at him. "How old are you?" The question arrived so unexpectedly that Danny answered before he thought. 22. Marcus nodded once, said nothing more, just looked at Danny for 3 full seconds, not in anger, not in threat, but with the full, tired, complete attention of a man who understood exactly what he was seeing. Then he turned back to Brennan. Danny's hand came away from his hip. Cole was already at the door, both hands raised, palms open. "This isn't the day, boss. This isn't the job." His voice was flat, professional, entirely without apology. It was over before we walked in. One man moved toward the door. Then another, then 2 more. Brennan stood with one man at his shoulder, the thick-built enforcer from St. Louis, who believed his history of bar fights made him formidable. They looked at Mark. They looked at each other. The arithmetic finished itself. "This isn't over," Brennan said, his voice squeezed between rage and something that looked almost like grief from the right angle. "You hear me? I'll burn this place to the—" Marcus fired. Not at Brennan, 6 feet to Brennan's left. The mirror behind the bar exploded. Glass came down in a sheet, catching the afternoon light as it fell, ringing against the bar top and the floor like a brief and violent rainfall. The sound in that enclosed room was enormous. It hit the walls and came back. When the echo died, both Colts were pointed at Brennan's head. Hammers back, triggers at half pull. 1, Marcus said the St. Louis man was already at the door. 2, Brennan's mouth worked. No words came out. 3rd, they ran. Brennan last. Still making sounds that had once been threats, sounds that diminished as the door swung open and the afternoon light came through, and the door swung shut again. Boots on the porch, horses, hooves on dry ground, fading, fading. Gone. Silence came down like something solid. Marcus lowered the guns. His hands began to shake. More than usual. The body releasing everything it had held in the past several minutes, pouring it back out all at once. He gripped the edge of the bar, not dramatically, simply to stay upright. Catherine came around from behind the bar. She walked to him without rushing. She stood in front of him and looked up at his face, at the closed eyes, at the jaw working against something, with the steadiness of a woman who had already decided what she thought of this man and was not revising that decision now. "Marcus," she said. He opened his eyes. "You protected this place," she said. "I could have killed all of them," he said. "Would have been simpler." "But you didn't." "No." She turned without another word, reached behind the bar, poured 2 cups from the pot she had kept warm through the entire afternoon, set one in front of him, plilled it across the wood. He looked at it. He picked it up. Sheriff Elias Morrison came through the door 10 minutes later, hand on his weapon, eyes moving fast across the room, the missing mirror, the glass on the floor, the gunpowders still hanging in the air. His eyes settled on Marcus. Recognition moved across his face, slowly, then arrived completely. "Marcus." "Marcus Webb," he said. "Silent Marcus." He looked at the Colts. "I heard you were dead. I was," Marcus said. Today was an exception. "Won't happen again if I can help it." Morrison looked at Catherine. "At the room, at the evidence of what had happened here, Brennan." "Gone," Catherine said. "East?" "From the sound of it." "Anyone unhurt?" "One mirror." Morrison was quiet for a moment. He took his hand off his weapon. "I want to arrest that man for what he's done to this town, for Thomas Rhee, for all of it. But I've never had a witness willing to stand up." He looked at Catherine, a question without words. "I'll stand up," she said. Morrison nodded. He looked at Marcus once more. "I won't ask questions," he said, "about the past or about today. This town owes you more than questions." He turned to go. "Then stop, Mrs. Rhee. How long has this man been working for you?" 18 months, she said. "And you've been paying him this whole time?" Catherine glanced at Marcus. "No," she said quietly. "He hasn't taken a single dollar." Morrison turned and looked at Marcus fully. Marcus looked at the bar. "Thomas was my friend," he said. "This was his house. I was just keeping it for him a while." Morrison stood in the doorway. Something moved through his expression. Humility and gratitude, and the feeling a man has when he realizes someone else has been holding up the weight he was supposed to be holding. He put his hat on. "I'll be in touch," he said. The door closed. "Here is something." Marcus Webb had never told anyone in Duskwater. He had not come here by accident. He had come because of a name in a piece of newsprint. A brief notice in a 6-month-old newspaper he had found lining a shelf in a trading post outside Cimarron, New Mexico. On a Tuesday in August, Thomas Allen Rhee, age 45, of Duskwater, proprietor of the Silver Bell Saloon, passed unexpectedly on the 12th of February, survived by his wife, Catherine Margaret Rhee. He was a good man and a fair one. This town is lessened by his passing. Marcus had read it twice. Then he had sat down on the bench outside that trading post and held the newspaper in both hands for a long time, the New Mexico sun on his back, the sounds of ordinary afternoon all around him. He had known Thomas Rhee for one evening, 20 years before, a saloon in a town he couldn't place on a map anymore. It had been raining, the kind of rain that comes at the end of a long, dry season, almost violent in its relief. Marcus had been at a corner table working through a whiskey he was not enjoying, trying to put distance between himself and the job he had just finished, and the face he could not stop. Seeing when he closed his eyes, Thomas Rhee sat down across from him without being invited, not intrusively, not aggressively, with the easy confidence of a man who had looked at another man sitting alone in a corner and decided that neither of them needed to be doing that tonight. "You look like a man who needs company more than he wants it," Thomas said. Marcus considered him. "That's a presumptuous thing to say to a stranger." "Probably," Thomas agreed. "But I've been wrong before." They talked for 3 hours. Marcus could not have explained afterward why he talked as freely as he did. Something about Thomas made it possible. He listened without storing what he heard. He asked questions out of genuine interest. He called for another round and paid for both without comment, twice, the way a person does when they are not keeping score. When the night was ending and they stood at the door with their coats, Thomas extended his hand. "I'm heading west, going to build something real. A place worth stopping at." He looked at Marcus with clear, direct eyes. "If you're ever out that way and you need somewhere to land, look for the Silver Bell in Duskwater. Meal and a bed, and no questions." "You don't know anything about me," Marcus said. "I know enough," Thomas replied. They shook hands, walked off into the wet night in opposite directions. Marcus had never gone to Duskwater. There had always been another job, another road, another reason to keep moving, and then the flat rock in New Mexico, and the gun belt he had left there, and the years of trying to become someone different. He had not looked for Thomas because finding Thomas meant looking backward, and looking backward was something he could not afford. Then he found the newspaper, and he understood, sitting on that bench in the New Mexico afternoon, that some debts have no expiration. Some debts outlast even the person you owe them to. He had ridden into Duskwater 6 weeks later with one simple purpose: to look after what Thomas Rhee had left behind, for as long as it needed looking after. 3 days after Brennan ran, Sheriff Morrison found the letter. He had gone to Brennan's office to inventory what had been abandoned. The desk drawers were open and bare, the filing cabinet emptied, the rug gone. But on the desk, weighted down by a forgotten coffee cup, was a single envelope, no stamp, no address, two words on the outside, written in a hand that pressed hard into the paper: Marcus Webb. Morrison brought it to the Silver Bell that evening and set it on the bar without comment. Marcus looked at it for a long time before he picked it up. Catherine stood nearby. Present without intruding. He opened it. 3 pages, written on both sides in that same pressing hand. Not the words of a man who had taken time or care. The words of a man writing in the only direction available, forward, without revision, without the ability to stop. Marcus read it slowly, then read it again, then set it down and looked at the far wall. His brother, he finally said. Catherine looked at him. Kansas City, 1849. His voice was flat, not without feeling. The flatness of a man managing feeling. Very carefully there was a trial. Stolen cattle. I gave testimony. The man was convicted. A pause. He was hanged the next morning. Brennan's brother, Catherine said, Jacob Brennan. Marcus looked at his hands. Jake Brennan was 16 years old. He watched it happen. Catherine read the letter herself. She read it carefully and completely. When she finished, she set it down beside his hands. The letter was not the letter of a villain. That was the hardest part of it. It was the letter of a man broken by grief at 16 years old, who had spent more than 2 decades building the break into a purpose, because purpose was the only thing that had kept him from falling apart entirely. Near the end, Brennan had written, I came here to kill you. I have been planning it for 23 years. I know exactly how I intended to do it. And then I walked into that saloon, and you were sweeping the floor. The man I have been hunting for 23 years was sweeping a floor. I don't know what to do with that. I don't know if Jacob was innocent. I have told myself for 23 years that he was. I still believe it. But I understand now that believing something and knowing something are not the same thing. I am not forgiving you. I want to be clear about that. I am sorry about Thomas Rhee. That part was wrong. I knew it was wrong. When I did it anyway. That is the thing I am most ashamed of. I am going east. I don't know where exactly. Somewhere I have not already been. Marcus folded the letter along its original creases, held it in both hands. He killed Thomas. Catherine said. Her voice was steady. Something underneath it was taking effort to hold in place. Yes. And he's gone. Yes. She was quiet for a long moment. Is that enough? For Thomas? Marcus thought about it, seriously. He did not answer quickly. Thomas was not a man who wanted blood. He wanted fairness. He wanted the people he loved to be safe. He wanted this place to stand. Marcus looked around the Silver Bell, at the bar his friend had built, at the walls, at the space where the mirror had been. Brennan is gone. His hold on this town is gone. You're still here. The Silver Bell is still here. He set the letter down. I think that's what Thomas would have wanted. Catherine nodded. One small, deliberate nod. The nod of a woman accepting something difficult, because it is true, and because carrying it differently would cost more than she could afford. She reached across the bar, put her hand over his. Neither of them said anything more about it that night. 3 days after Brennan ran, the letter arrived. 3 weeks after the letter, someone else came through the door. This time, it was not someone coming to take something. It was someone coming to give something back. 3 weeks after the confrontation on a gray Tuesday afternoon, the Silver Bell door opened. Catherine's hand moved toward the shelf below the bar. Marcus looked up from the table, where he was mending a chair leg. Cole came in alone, no coat, just a plain work shirt, trousers, and his hat held in both hands in front of him, the way men hold hats when they want to communicate. They have come without weapons or intentions. He stopped just inside the door. Catherine's hand stayed where it was. Marcus set down the chair leg. He read Cole the way he had always read rooms, quickly, completely, without visible effort. Then he said, "Come in, Cole." Cole came to the bar. He did not sit down. He stood with his hat and looked at Marcus and then at Catherine and then back at Marcus. "I'm not here for trouble," he said. "I know," Marcus said. Cole was quiet, working something out, the particular difficulty of a man who has come to say something he has not entirely figured out how to say. "I wanted to ask you something," he said finally. "Just one thing." "Ask." "When you were talking to the kid, Danny, when you asked him how old he was." Cole paused. "What were you thinking?" Marcus considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I was thinking about a boy in Arizona," he said. "Reset." "A long time ago." He set both hands flat on the table. "And I was thinking that some things, once done, cannot be undone, and that the only thing worth doing in that moment was to make sure that boy didn't add something to himself that he would spend the rest of his life trying to put down." Cole was quiet for a long time. The Silver Bell held its quiet around them. Outside, the main street of Duskwater went about its afternoon business, unhurried, unaware, ordinary. "I'm thinking about leaving the work," Cole said. "The kind of work I've been doing." "Good. I don't know what else there is." "There's other things," Marcus said. "They pay less. They're harder to find. And they're worth considerably more." He picked up the chair leg again. "It takes a while to see that. But it's true." Cole turned his hat in his hands once, twice, then he put it on his head. "Thank you," he said. He walked to the door, stopped, without turning around. "For what it's worth, I didn't know about Thomas Rhee, what Brennan did to him. I didn't know that when I hired on. I believe you," Marcus said. Cole went out. The door closed. Catherine let out a slow breath. "You believe him?" she asked. "Yes." Marcus turned the chair leg in his hands, examining the joint. A man who didn't care wouldn't have come back to say it. From the piano bench, Charlie Hutton, who had arrived an hour earlier and had been sitting quietly, not playing, just sitting, opened the piano lid. He began to play, a slow, low melody that no one in the room recognized, something he was making up as he went, or something so old it had lost its name. It filled the Silver Bell and settled into the walls and the floorboards and the space where the mirror used to be. And for the first time since the afternoon the glass came down, The room felt entirely like itself again. Word reached Duskwater about Jake Brennan some weeks after he left. He had sold everything, every property, every holding, all of it gone inside 4 days, at prices below market, to buyers who couldn't believe their luck. Then he had ridden east, and nobody had seen him since. Some said Kansas City, some said Missouri, some said he had gone somewhere. Nobody knew his name and intended to keep it that way. Morrison filed the paperwork, returned 3 properties to their rightful owners, began the slow, methodical work of unraveling what Brennan had built. It took time, it took patience, but it moved forward. Small steps, Morrison said, but they're steps. Danny Rourke came back to Duskwater 6 weeks after the confrontation. Alone, on a horse that wasn't as good as the one he'd ridden in with Brennan. He went directly to Morrison's office, stood in the doorway with his hat in his hand. "I'm looking for honest work," he said. "If there is any." Morrison looked at him for a long moment. "There's always honest work," he said. "Question is whether a man's willing to do it at honest wages." "Yes, sir," Danny said. "That's exactly what I'm looking for." Morrison hired him on a trial basis, with clear conditions and regular corrections and more patience than Danny probably deserved. But the young man tried, genuinely and visibly. Marcus watched from a distance and said nothing, just nodded once to himself and went back to work. Doak Price noticed it first, the way Marcus moved slower in the second autumn. Not dramatically. He was not the kind of man who diminished dramatically. He simply did a little less each week, rested a little more. Said nothing about either. Doc mentioned it one afternoon in October when Marcus came in with a tightness in his chest he had been ignoring for 2 weeks. "Your heart," Doc said, setting down his stethoscope, "has been working harder than it should." "For a long time. What does that mean in plain language?" Marcus asked. "It means you don't have unlimited time." "None of us do." "But you have less than average." Doc looked at him over his glasses. "Rest when you can. Do less. Let things be someone else's problem when possible." "I'm already doing very little," Marcus said. "Then do that quietly and without stress and see how long it holds," Marcus told Catherine that evening. He told her plainly. Without drama, the way he told her most things. She was quiet for a while. The Silver Bell was closed for the night. Just the 2 of them and the low lamp and the sound of the autumn wind working at the eaves. Then she said, "You're not going anywhere without fixing that loose board by the back door." "It's been annoying me for 3 months." Marcus looked at her. Something moved across his face. That almost smile, the one that had been there since the beginning, the one that was more than a memory now. He fixed the board the next morning, first thing, before the coffee was even done. "Here is what the next 18 months looked like, not the events of them. Most days had no events worth cataloging. What they looked like was simpler than that. They looked like a Thursday morning in November. Frost on the window glass. Marcus and Catherine on the front step with their coffee, watching the sun come up over the eastern ridge, turning the frost to silver, then to nothing, not talking. Just watching, the kind of watching that does not require commentary, because the thing being watched is enough. They looked like Danny Rourke in a deputy's badge, standing straighter than he used to, still making mistakes, still being corrected by Morrison with more patience than Danny probably deserved. But trying, genuinely and visibly trying. They looked like Morrison himself, who spent a year quietly and methodically unraveling what Brennan had built, returning properties, filing charges where charges could be filed, rebuilding the machinery of law in Duskwater into something that actually worked slowly, imperfectly, the way law is always built. They looked like the Silver Bell on a Friday night full. Again, the way it had been full in Thomas's time card games and conversation Charlie Hutton at his piano, the particular warmth of a room that has survived something and come out the other side, still standing. They looked like Marcus, moving more slowly. His back had always been bent, but it bent a little further now. Week by week, with the gradual and undramatic persistence of a body working on reserves, he still made the coffee. Every morning. That was the last thing to go, and it did not go. There was one morning, a morning in early spring, the kind that arrives tentatively in the high country, uncertain of its own welcome, when they sat on the front step together and did not talk for more than an hour. The mountains to the west still held their winter white. At the high elevations, the main street was empty. A single bird was doing something complicated in the cottonwood tree by the livery. After a long time, Marcus said, "This is what I was looking for." Catherine looked at him. "For 20 years," he said. "This, sitting somewhere worth sitting, coffee that someone made because they wanted to. A morning with nothing required of me." He looked at the mountains. "I didn't know what it looked like until I was in it." Catherine looked at the mountains too. "Thomas used to say that." She said, "Yet, that you can't recognize the thing you need most until you're already inside it." He was right about most things. "Yes," she said, he was. They sat until the street began to wake, the blacksmith's hammer, the dog a door somewhere opening, boots on a porch, all the ordinary sounds of a town going about its life. Then Marcus stood slowly and went inside to start the coffee for the rest of the morning. The last winter came in early and stayed late. Marcus slowed with it. He did a little less each week, rested a little more, said nothing about either. But he still made the coffee every morning. That was the last thing to go, and it did not go. On the morning of the 14th of March, Catherine came downstairs at 5 o'clock. The coffee was made. The pot sat warm on the iron stove, filling the silver bell with its familiar smell. The front room was clean. The chairs were set properly. Everything was exactly as it always was. Marcus was not at the small table by the stove. Catherine stood for a moment. Then she poured herself a cup, went to his door, knocked. Nothing. She opened the door. He was lying in his bed with his eyes closed and his hands folded on his chest. His face carried an expression she had never seen on him while he was alive, an expression of complete and uncomplicated rest, the expression of a man who has set down a very heavy thing, and finally, after a very long time, let it stay down. Doc Price said his heart had simply stopped quickly, in the night, the way a candle goes out when the wax is spent. Not dramatically, not with struggle, just a final small dimming, and then stillness. He didn't suffer, the doctor said. I want you to know that. Whatever those last hours were, they were peaceful. Catherine stood in the doorway and looked at him for a long time. Then she went to the bed. She straightened the blanket that did not need straightening, did it carefully, with both hands, smoothing it across his chest and tucking it gently at the sides, the way you would do for someone still sleeping. That you did not want to wake. She stood up. She went back downstairs. She poured herself another cup, the coffee he had made for the last time this morning before he lay down. She sat at the small table near the stove, held it in both hands, let the silence of the silver bell hold her while the sun came up outside. It was only then, when she finally stood to put the cup in the basin, that she saw it. The corner of paper showing beneath his pillow. She went back. She sat on the edge of his bed. She opened the letter. It was written in his hand, careful and slow. The letters pressed unevenly by hands that did not always cooperate, but legible. Complete. Catherine, I did not come here because I had nowhere else to go. I want you to understand that there were other places. There are always other places for a man willing to keep moving. I came here because of Thomas, because of a debt I had let go unpaid for too long, because reading his name in a newspaper made me understand that some things cannot be deferred indefinitely. But I need to tell you something I have not said out loud. I knew that Brennan had been looking for me, but not specifically. I did not know his name or his reasons until near the end. But I knew the kind of attention that follows a man with a past like mine. I had felt it for several years, the way you feel weather before it arrives. I want to be clear about what this means and what it does not mean. It does not mean I came here to fight. I came here for Thomas. I came here because this place was worth coming to and worth staying in and worth being useful to. What it means is this. I knew that wherever I stopped long enough to have something worth protecting, the past would eventually arrive. I had accepted that, and when I looked at what was here, at what Thomas had built and what you had kept standing, I understood that if I was going to make one final stand, this was the place I would choose. Not because I planned for it, because when it came, I wanted to be standing somewhere that mattered. I am sorry I was not here when Thomas needed me. I have thought about that almost every day since I arrived. I believe he would understand, because he was the kind of man who understood things. But I am sorry for it, regardless. Take care of the Silver Bell. It is the best place I have ever been. Marcus Catherine read the letter twice. Then she folded it and held it against her chest for a while, sitting on the edge of his bed with the morning light coming in through the small window and the sounds of Duskwater beginning to fill the street outside. After a while, she stood up. She went downstairs. She opened the Silver Bell. They buried Marcus Webb on a Saturday. The cemetery sat on the hill at the east edge of town, above the valley, with a view that on clear days extended 40 miles to the mountains. Thomas Rhee was buried there. Half the county came Morrison in his good coat, Danny Rourke standing straight in his deputy's badge, hat off for the entire service without being reminded. Charlie Hutton near the back, not playing anything, there was no piano. But his lips moved occasionally, silently, as if running through something in his head, committing it to the only archive he fully trusted. There was a man at the far edge of the gathered crowd whom Morrison recognized, standing with his hat in his hands, not speaking to anyone. He left quietly before the final words were said. Walking back down the hill alone, nobody stopped him. Nobody called after him. Some attendances are complete simply by happening. The marker was plain stone, as Marcus had been a plain man in the end. Marcus Whibby B. 1802, day 1873, Cavalry Scout Deputy Marshal Friend, and he chose Pesa 2 markers on a hill above a valley, Thomas Rhee, Marcus Webb, side by side, the way it should have been a long time ago, the way it was now, and the Silver Bell still standing below, smoke rising from the stovepipe, door open, light on inside, the way Thomas built it, the way Marcus kept it, the way Catherine intended to keep it still. Catherine kept the Silver Bell open the morning after they buried Marcus. She came downstairs at 5 o'clock, the same as always. She made the coffee herself. It took longer than it used to. The pot was heavier than she remembered, or perhaps her hands were simply aware of the difference. Now, aware of what was not there, in the space beside the stove, she poured a cup. She sat at the small table by the grate. She drank it in the silence that Marcus had left behind, which was a different kind of silence than the one before he came, fuller. Somehow, the way a room feels different after someone has lived in it for a long time, changed by the living, even after the living is done. She had kept both letters. She put them in a small wooden box. She made herself. Thomas had taught her basic joinery the first year they opened, a skill she had thought impractical at the time, and had since found many uses for. She kept them together because that seemed right to her, because the story was not complete without both of them. Marcus had been shaped by his past, the same way Brennan had been shaped by. The difference between them was not what they had done, it was what they had chosen to do with what they had done. One had chosen to keep paying, to keep hurting, to build a life oriented entirely around the wound. One had chosen to set it down. Not cleanly. 20 years of sleepless nights, and a boy's face in every dream testified to that, but to keep choosing every day to be something other than what the worst of his past made possible. She kept both letters because she wanted to remember that those were the two roads, and that the road Marcus chose was harder, and that he chose it anyway. Morrison came by the Silver Bell 3 days after the burial. He set the bar and accepted a cup of coffee and set his hat on the stool beside him. He looked around the room the way people look at places they are trying to memorize. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I'm open," Catherine said. He looked at her. "That's not what I asked. It's my answer." He nodded. He drank his coffee. "I've been thinking about what he said." Morrison told her. Marcus. About Thomas being his friend. About this being Thomas's house. About just keeping it for him a while. He set down his cup. "I've been a lawman in this town for 11 years, and an old man who swept floors did more for Duskwater than I managed in all that time." "You're doing it now," Catherine said. "Too late. For some things. Not for the things that are left." Morrison was quiet then. "I'm going to make sure what he did here matters. What Thomas built. What you've kept standing. I'm going to make sure this town deserves it," he put on his hat. "That's the least I can do." He paid for his coffee, left the coins on the bar carefully, more than the coffee was worth, and walked out into the morning. She did not replace the mirror. That was the first decision. People asked about the bare wall, the pale rectangle of paint protected from fading for 11 years by the frame, now exposed, now simply there, she told them. Every time, she told them. And the telling became, over time, its own kind of keeping. Why not replace it? A traveling salesman asked her once, a year after. Catherine looked at the bare wall. "Because every time someone asks about it, I get to tell them who Marcus was," she said, "and what he did, and why he stayed." A new mirror would just be a mirror. The salesman looked at the wall for a moment. Then he ordered another drink and asked her to tell him the story. She told him. She told it the way she always told it. Starting not with the guns, but with the morning, she came downstairs and found the coffee already made, and an old man cleaning windows with old practiced precision. The way she always told it, because that was where it started. Not with the confrontation, not with the guns, with the coffee. The story spread the way stories spread, not in one direction, not cleanly. It went out from Duskwater in a dozen different directions at once, carried by a dozen different people. And by the time it reached the towns and the crossroads and the saloons further out, it had changed the way water changes when it runs over ground, picking up the color of everything it touches. The version that reached Santa Fe had Marcus killing all 6 men. The version told in a saloon in Abilene had him drawing both guns simultaneously before Brennan finished his first sentence, a thing that was physically impossible and which the teller knew was impossible, and told anyway because it was a better story. A newspaper in Denver ran a short piece, Silent Marcus. The legend came back 3 verifiable facts, several inventions, and a concluding paragraph that described Marcus riding off into a sunset on a black horse, which was wrong on 3 separate counts, but which the writer clearly felt was the correct ending for a story of that kind. A version circulated in the territories for several years that had Marcus, being a ghost, an actual ghost, sent to protect the righteous and punish the wicked. This version was popular with a certain kind of person and was retold with great conviction. Marcus would have found it both flattering and ridiculous in roughly equal measure. Charlie Hutton told it closest to true. He told it at the Silver Bell, mostly on quiet evenings when someone new came through and asked about the bare wall. He told it the way a man tells something he witnessed and wants to get right, not because the dramatic parts weren't worth telling. They were, but because something else was worth telling more. "You want to know what I saw?" Charlie would say, settling back on his piano bench. "I'll tell you what I saw. Not the version from Denver, not the version from Abilene. What I actually saw, sitting right here on this bench for 18 months. And then he would tell it, starting not with the guns, starting with the morning he arrived, the old man on the gray horse. The hat held carefully, the voice rough from long disuse. Starting with the floors swept before anyone was awake. Starting with the coffee already made. Every single morning for 18 months. That's the part people skip, Charlie would say. Everybody wants to tell you about the guns, about how fast he was, about coal going white, about the mirror coming down, and those things happened. I was there. They were exactly as remarkable as they sound. He would pause, look at his hands on the piano keys, but the part nobody tells is the 18 months before that. The man who got here before the town was awake, who fixed the things that needed fixing, who never once asked for anything he hadn't already given. That was Marcus Webb, not the other one. The other one was just something he'd carried for a long time and tried very hard to set down. He would look up. He nearly managed it, too. 18 months. And in those 18 months, he was more used to this town than most men manage in a lifetime of trying. The children heard it differently. They heard the version that grew in the retelling, the fast draw, the mirror exploding, the 6 men running. They heard it and made it bigger, the way children do. By the time it filtered down to the youngest ones, the ones who had been 3 or 4 when it happened, Marcus Webb had become something close to mythological, a figure of the frontier, a ghost story, a legend. Catherine heard these versions and did not correct them. She understood that legends serve a purpose, that the story a town tells about itself is part of what the town becomes. But she kept the true version in the wooden box, in the bare wall, in the way she told it when people asked. "He swept my floors," she would say. "He made my coffee. He was here every morning for 18 months, asking for almost nothing." That was the man. Everything else was just something he used to be. Morrison made good on his word. It took time. It took the kind of patience that is easy to describe and very hard to practice. The patience of doing small things correctly over and over until the small things accumulate into something large. He deputized Danny Rourke. He brought in 2 other men, veterans, both of them, who had come west looking for something quieter than they'd left and had ended up in the particular kind of quiet that requires work to maintain. He rebuilt the legal machinery of Duskwater from the ground up, not perfectly. There is no perfect legal machinery, but solidly, with the attention that a good thing deserves. He also did something no one expected. 6 months after Marcus died, Morrison arranged for a formal hearing on the death of Thomas Rhee. Not a criminal proceeding. Brennan was gone, and what evidence existed pointed in directions that were difficult to follow legally. But a formal record, a public acknowledgement, a piece of paper in the county archives that said, Thomas Allen Rhee did not die of natural causes. He died because he would not be moved. And the town of Duskwater acknowledges this and names him accordingly. Catherine sat in that hearing in the same black dress she had been wearing since the February morning. Thomas had not come downstairs. She listened to the formal language being read aloud. She looked at her hands in her lap, and she thought, he would have been embarrassed by this. He would have said it wasn't necessary. He would have said, I was just doing what made sense. Anyone would have done the same, she thought. No, not anyone. That's the point, Thomas. Not anyone would. The town passed ordinances against intimidation, against extortion, against the particular kind of slow, patient economic pressure that Brennan had used to acquire what wasn't his. They were imperfect ordinances. All ordinances are imperfect. But they were there, written down, enforceable. A fence along a road that had previously had no fence, not enough to stop everything, but enough to make certain things harder. Enough to make people think twice. Enough to mean that what happened to Thomas Rhee and Catherine and the other families who had sold at gunpoint prices was at least more difficult to repeat. Small steps, Morrison had said. They were small steps. But the distance they covered over time was not small. Catherine watched all of this and said little. She rang the silver bell. She made the coffee every morning. She kept the floors clean. She had hired a young woman named Ida to help with the heavier work, but she swept the front room herself every morning because it was the thing she could do that felt most like keeping what Marcus had kept. She was not sentimental about it. She did not light candles or speak aloud to people who were not there. She simply swept and made the coffee and opened the silver bell and let the day come in. There were hard mornings. She would not pretend otherwise. There were mornings when the quiet before the town woke up was simply quiet, empty rather than full, the absence of something rather than the presence of peace. Those mornings she made the coffee anyway. She swept anyway. She opened the doors anyway, because that was the thing Thomas had built and Marcus had kept, and she intended to keep. Not just the building, not just the business, but the act of opening, the daily decision that this place would be here, that the doors would open, that the light would be on inside. That was the thing worth keeping. She kept it. Here is what became of the people who passed through the story of Marcus Webb. Danny Rourke stayed in Duskwater. He was never the best deputy Morrison had. That distinction went to a quiet woman named Ruth Alcott, who came to town 3 years later and turned out to have a gift for seizing trouble coming before it arrived. But Danny was steady, and steadiness in the work of keeping a town honest is worth more than brilliance. He made mistakes. He was corrected. He learned. He stayed. He never spoke publicly about what had happened in the Silver Bell, never made himself a character in the story the way some men would have, never mentioned being there, never traded on the proximity to something remarkable. But sometimes, when he was talking to young men who were new to the deputy's work and full of themselves in the way that young men are full of themselves, he would say to them, "The strongest thing a man can do in a room full of trouble is choose not to make it worse." Nobody knew where he had heard that. He had not heard it anywhere. He had figured it out himself on the long ride back from nowhere, after the confrontation at the Silver Bell, thinking about a question so unexpected. It had stopped his hand before his brain could finish the thought. "How old are you?" He thought about that question for the rest of his life. Cole left the territories entirely. He went east first to St. Louis, where he had family he had not seen in many years, and who were surprised to see him, and more surprised by the fact that he seemed to intend to stay. He worked a warehouse job for 2 years, then a freight company. He was not good at either of them. The skills that made a man useful in Cole's former line of work did not transfer directly to the business of moving goods from one place to another. But he was honest, and he showed up, and he was patient with himself about the learning in the way that people are patient when they have finally understood that the alternative to learning is going back to something they cannot go back to. He wrote one letter. He addressed it to the Silver Bell, Duskwater, care of Catherine Rhee. "It was not long, Mrs. Rhee. I was in your saloon on the afternoon of the confrontation. I was one of the 6. I don't expect you to forgive that. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. I'm writing because I want you to know that what I saw that afternoon changed something in me, that I had thought was finished changing. A man can get to a point where he believes the shape of himself is the permanent shape, that who he has become is who he will always be. Your man showed me that was wrong, not by what he said, by what he didn't do. I hope the silver bell is still standing." "I expect it is," called Catherine, read the letter twice. She put it in the wooden box with the others. It belonged there. Charlie Hutton played piano at the Silver Bell for 11 more years after Marcus died. He was 73. When his hands finally told him they were finished with the work, not dramatically, not all at once, just a gradual and undeniable stiffening that made certain things impossible and certain other things simply not what they had been. He closed the piano lid on a Friday evening in October after the last customers had gone. He sat for a while with his hands in his lap. Then he stood up, took his coat from the hook, and walked out through the same side door he had walked out through on the afternoon. Brennan came. This time, though, he stopped on the porch. He stood in the night air for a long moment. Then he came back inside. He stood at the bar. "I want to tell you something," he said to Catherine. She was wiping down the bar top. She stopped. "I've been sitting at that piano for 26 years, longer than Thomas ran this place, longer than you've run it, longer than Marcus swept those floors." He looked at the piano. "In all that time, I never once got up from that bench when it mattered. Every time something hard was happening, I closed the lid and went out the side door. I told myself that was my job, to play, not to fight, to observe, not to act." Catherine held the cloth in her hand, did not speak. The day Brennan came, the last time, I walked out the same as always. And I stood in the alley and I listened to what was happening inside, and I told myself, Marcus is in there. Marcus will handle it. It's not my place. He was quiet for a moment, and Marcus did handle it, because Marcus was Marcus. But I've been thinking ever since about what would have happened if Marcus hadn't been there. If it had just been you and 6 armed men and a piano player in the alley telling himself it wasn't his place. He put his hat on. I don't know if I would have come back in. I'd like to think I would, but I don't know. And not knowing has kept me company for a long time. He moved toward the door. I just wanted to say that out loud before I didn't have the chance anymore. He walked out. Catherine watched the door swing shut behind him. Then she went back to wiping the bar. But she thought about what he had said for a long time after, about the people who stay and the people who go out the side door, and the question of which one you are until the moment arrives that answers it. Morrison retired from the sheriff's work when he was 64. He had done what he had promised, made the town deserve what Thomas built and Marcus kept. It had taken 9 years. He had been imperfect at it, slower than he should have been. On certain things, too cautious on others, wrong in specific ways that he catalogued privately and did not share widely. But the machinery was there, the ordinances, the deputies, the culture, difficult to measure, impossible to see directly, but present in the way people talked about what was acceptable and what was not, in the way they watched out for each other, in the way they did not simply step aside any more when something wrong was happening in front of them. He came to the Silver Bell on his last day. As sheriff, he sat at the bar, and Catherine poured him a coffee, and they sat together in the quiet of a Tuesday morning and did not say very much. Before he left, he said he would have liked knowing it worked out this way, Marcus. He would have liked knowing it wasn't all for nothing. He knew, Catherine said. How? She thought about the letter in the wooden box, about the last lines of it. Take care of the Silver Bell. It is the best place I have ever been. He stayed, she said simply. Men like Marcus don't stay in places they believe are for nothing. He stayed. That was how he said it. Morrison sat with that. Then he nodded once, put on his hat, walked out into the morning. Catherine rang the Silver Bell. For 22 years after Marcus died, she was 61 years old when she finally handed the keys to Ida, the young woman she had hired for the heavier work, who had turned out to be neither young nor temporary, having spent 14 years becoming the kind of person a place like the Silver Bell makes of the people it keeps. The handover was not ceremonial. Catherine put the keys on the bar. Ida picked them up. Same rules, Catherine said. Same rules, Ida agreed. That was all. Catherine moved into a smaller house on the east side of Duskwater, closer to the hill. She kept the wooden box. She kept the habit of early mornings. She had never entirely lost the schedule Marcus had run, the 4:30 wakefulness, the hours before the town stirred. She made her coffee in the small kitchen of the Smalls' house, and she watched the light change through the east-facing window, and she thought about the things worth thinking about in the quiet, before the world became loud. Thomas, Marcus, the particular quality of a life that had been shaped by both of them. She outlived Morrison by 4 years. She outlived Charlie Hutton by 2. She was there when Danny Rourke retired, when Ida finally hired someone else to do the heavier work at the Silver Bell, when the town's population doubled with the railroad and then changed in all the ways that towns change when railroads arrive. She watched all of it from the particular vantage point of a woman who had been there from before the beginning, from before the town knew what it was going to be, from the days when it was just a crossroads and a dream and a man named Thomas Rhee building something real. She watched, and she kept her counsel, and she told the story when people asked, which they did often. In the 22nd year, the year before she gave Ida the keys, a young journalist came to Duskwater from a newspaper in the East. He was writing a piece about the frontier, about the old stories, about the gap between legend and truth. Someone had told him about Silent Marcus, about the Silver Bell, about the bare wall where the mirror had been. He came to find Catherine Rhee. He found her in the Silver Bell on a Tuesday morning, sitting at the small table by the stove, drinking her coffee, as she had done most mornings for 22 years. He introduced himself. He explained his purpose. He asked if she would speak with him. She looked at him the way she had always looked at people who came through her doors, quickly, completely. "What do you want to know?" "I want to know the truth," he said. "About Marcus Webb, the real version, not the legend." "Sit down," she said. "I'll get you a cup." She told him everything. She told him about the October afternoon, and the gray horse, and the man who asked for work and said his name was just Marcus. She told him about the floors swept before dawn, the coffee always made, the 18 months of quiet and useful presence. She told him about Brennan, the visits, the broken window, the 3 days. She told him about the afternoon. The 6 men came, and Charlie closed his piano lid and the room emptied. She told him about the Colt clearing leather and the hand that didn't shake. She told him about Cole, about the mirror, about the silence. After, she told him about the letter in the wooden box, both letters, and what they said and what they meant when you held them together. She told him about the last 18 months, about the coffee Marcus made every single morning until the morning he didn't come downstairs, about the letter under the pillow, about the marker on the hill. She told him all of it. The journalist wrote quickly. He had good hands for the work, fast and neat, the marks of a man who had trained himself to catch what people said before they reconsidered. When she finished, he looked up from his notes. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can ask, what do you think his story is about? If you had to say it in one sentence, what is it?" Catherine looked at her coffee cup, at the bare wall where the mirror had been, at the floorboards Marcus had swept 10,000 times. She thought about Thomas building the window frame, taking 3 days to get it right, because things built right lasted longer than things built fast. She thought about Marcus setting the gun belt, on a flat rock in New Mexico and walking away. She thought about him, choosing to come here anyway, choosing to stay, choosing on one afternoon to fire at a mirror instead of at a man. "It's about a man who did hard things for a long time," she said finally, "and then decided to do something harder." The journalist looked at her. "What's harder than what he did?" "Being kind," she said. "When you have every reason not to be. When the world has trained you for something else entirely. When everything you know is the other thing. Being kind, anyway, every day, without an audience, without a reward, just because it was the right way to spend the time he had left." She picked up her cup. "That's harder than drawing fast." "I promise you that." The journalist's piece ran in a newspaper back east. It was a good piece. He had done justice to it, had resisted the temptation to make it bigger than it was, had told it the way Catherine told it, starting not with the guns but with the coffee, ending not with the legend but with the marker on the hill. Some people read it and were disappointed. They had expected the Santa Fe version, the all-six-men version, the ghost and angel version. This version was quieter than that, more ordinary in its parts, if not in its sum. But other people, more people than the journalist expected, read it and held it in a way that suggested it had arrived somewhere real, had touched something that the louder versions had not managed to reach. A woman in Philadelphia wrote a letter to the newspaper saying she had read the piece 3 times and thought about her own father, who had come home from a war and put something down and spent 30 years being kind instead. A man in Boston wrote that he had been carrying something for a long time and had not known it was possible to set it down until he read about a man who had done it on a flat rock in New Mexico. The letters came, not many, but real ones, the kind that means something. Catherine heard about the piece but did not read it. She had lived the story. She did not need the newspaper's version. What she had was better. The wooden box, the bare wall, the habit of early mornings, the daily act of making the coffee that no one had asked her to make for anyone but herself in 22 years, but which she made anyway, because it was the ritual that connected the day she was in to all the days before it, back and back, through Marcus, through Thomas, to the beginning of something she was still, every morning, choosing to continue. She died in her small house on a November morning, when the first real frost had come overnight and turned the world silver. She was found by Ida, who had formed the habit of checking on Catherine every morning, since Catherine had moved to the smaller house. She was in her chair by the east-facing window. The coffee was made. Her cup was on the table beside her, half finished, as if she had set it down to look at something out the window and simply not picked it up again. Her hands were in her lap. Her face was at rest in the way that faces rest when the rest is final. Price. The younger Doc Price. The son, who had taken over the practice 11 years before, said she had not suffered, that her heart had simply decided it was finished, quickly as her husband's had. As the man who had kept her floors clean and made her coffee and stood between her and 6 armed men on a Thursday afternoon had done in his time. They buried her on the hill, between Thomas and Marcus, by her own instruction, left in a document with the younger Doc Price 2 years before, in the specific and practical way she had arranged most things. Between them she had written, "That's where I was in life. It makes sense for it to be that way after." The marker was plain stone. Her name, her dates, and below that, at her request, just 4 words. He kept it open. 3 markers on a hill above a valley. Thomas Rhee, Marcus Webb, Catherine Rhee. The valley below them changed with the seasons. Green in summer, gold in fall, white in winter, tentative and tender in spring. The town changed too. New buildings, new people, new troubles of the ordinary kind that towns accumulate and manage and survive. The silver bell was still there. Ida ran it for 17 years. Then her daughter then, many years after that, a man who had grown up in Duskwater and moved east and come back because some places work their way into you in ways that distance doesn't clear. The bare wall was still there. By then it was famous, a landmark of its own kind, the kind that no one ever got around to repainting because the story attached to it had become part of what the Silver Bell was. People came to see it, stood in front of it, asked the person behind the bar to tell them about it, and the person behind the bar told them, every time with the same starting point, because that was how Catherine had told it, and Catherine had got it from Marcus himself, starting not with the guns, starting with the coffee. Here is the thing about Marcus Webb that none of the versions got quite right. Not the Santa Fe version, not the Denver version, not the Ghost and Angel version. The thing none of them got right was this: he was not remarkable because of what he could do. A great many men can do dangerous things. The world has never been short of men who can do dangerous things. He was remarkable because of what he chose not to do, because he was a man fully capable of the easiest solution, the solution that would have ended things cleanly and completely in the first 30 seconds, and he did not take it. He gave Brennan a chance. He gave Cole a chance. He gave Danny a chance. He fired at a mirror. He counted to 2 and stopped at 2 because they ran at 2, and he was glad they ran at 2, and he was not performing mercy or nobility. He was just tired of the thing he was capable of and grateful for any reason not to do it. That was the man. Not the fast draw, not the steady hand, not the legend that grew in the retelling until it was larger than any man could be. The man who swept the floors, who made the coffee, who was there every morning asking for almost nothing and giving what he had, who chose at the end to be standing somewhere that mattered to him, and when the moment came that required him to be what he had always been capable of being, he was that thing for exactly as long as necessary, and not one moment longer. And then he put the guns away, and he gripped the edge of the bar to stay upright, and he let Catherine push a cup of coffee across the wood to him, and he picked it up. The story spread the way all good stories spread, in stages, in versions, changed by the telling, improved in some places, lost something real in others. But the core of it, the thing at the center that refused to be changed, no matter how the telling shifted, remained. An old man, a town that dismissed him, a moment that required everything he had, and the choice, made clearly and at real cost, to be the man he wanted to be rather than the man he was capable of being. That was the story. That will always be the story. Because some stories are not really about the people they contain. They are about the question at the center of them. The question Marcus Webb answered every day for 18 months, and answered finally and completely on one Thursday afternoon in the Silver Bell, Duskwater, in the year of our Lord 1871. When the moment comes, and the moment always comes, who do you choose to be? Not who are you capable of being, not what does the world expect, not what would be easier or faster or more final. Who do you choose to be? Marcus Webb answered that question with a broom, with a cockpot, with 18 months of quiet, useful, unremarkable days that were, in fact, the most remarkable thing about him. And when the broom wasn't enough anymore, when quiet days and useful work and the patient accumulation of small kindnesses had been tried and had run up against something that required a different answer, he answered it with a gun. And then he put the gun away, and he picked up the broom again, and he chose peace, and that choice mattered. That choice is still mattering, out here in this story, in this moment, in whatever you carry and whatever you're choosing what to do with. That choice never stops mattering. Not here, not anywhere, not as long as there are people with the capacity for Both things, the violence and the kindness, standing in rooms and deciding which one to be. The sun goes down over the mountains west of Duskwater, the same mountains. Marcus watched from the front step of the Silver Bell on a spring morning with a cup of coffee in both hands, and a town waking up around him, and nothing required of him but to be there. The light goes from gold to red to purple, the way it always has, the way it will. Long after the last person who knew his name is gone, the Silver Bell is still lit. The door is still open. The coffee is still on. Come in, sit down. The story is finished, but the place it happened is still here. That's enough. That's more than enough.